people think it is cool to have stress. So stress is like a badge they're wearing. I am very stressed. That means I must be very productive. I must be very busy. No, that's not right. Other thing it does is it also regulates how fast or slow the food is passing through our digestive tract.
Now, cortisol is that mischievous little hormone. It is like that overzealous friend who shows up at doorstep uninvited and barges in shouting, "We have a crisis, we have a crisis, we have a crisis." But when actually all that you've done is misplaced your car keys. So, this hormone is the ultimate drama queen of your body, of your endocrine system.
That we are not going to be able to change everything in our life, but how we respond to it is very much in our control. So that is something that I would highly recommend for everyone. Stay calm and carry on. Ever wondered why we feel so stressed all the time, and what are the long term effects of all of this stress? If we want to know more about what exactly happens when we are stressed, we need to know about another neurotransmitter, which is cortisol. So, welcome to today's episode where we are going to talk about this stress hormone, which is cortisol. So, please welcome our co host, Sujata Gokhale.
Hi,
Hi,
Rashmi.
Sujata.
Hi, Rashmi.
I
How
hope
are
you're not
you?
stressed.
Yes, I hope my cortisol levels are not high.
Yes. So,
Anyway,
I try and do everything to keep my cortisol levels in check.
yes, and
And
we'll
I'll share at
delve
the end
into.
of this episode what I have done to really reduce my cortisol levels. I did something very different. I'm going to share it at the end of the podcast. So stay tuned and
Oh,
watch till the
great.
very end.
Oh, great. So thank you, Rashmi. Today we are going to delve much more deeper into this neurotransmitter cortisol. And welcome, dear viewers. This is our continued series on neurotransmitters. So if you have not viewed our previous episodes, click on the links given in the description below, and you'll find about 7 to 8 of our neurotransmitters listed there. Enjoy those recordings, they're very informative. So, usually we have understood from the past episodes that humans and their bacteria have, developed various methods of communicating and regulating each other. And this communication and regulation, we have already seen the impact it has on our stress levels, on our, negative emotions, or how they are developed, and also how they disrupt our gut motility. So, if you have a negative emotion, it could also result in your gut motility being disturbed. So it's very interconnected, the two communication links. So this gut brain axis is significant, and it is not only in temporary cases, like in this case, when maybe I am panicked about doing this, or my cortisol levels may be high for this particular podcast, but it could also develop into a chronic condition, wherein you're always in that stress state. So psychological stress and depression can lead to increased consumption of highly salted foods or sugary foods. So it kind of creates a craving, affecting the type of bacteria that flourish. So it's an interconnection. You can see that stress asks us to eat for food which are not good, and then that results in affecting the gut bacteria that are flourishing in our in our stomach or in our gut, in our intestine. So stress and depression can also alter, therefore, the composition of our gut bacteria, and in return cause inflammation and diseases. So all this we heard in our previous episodes as well. So this week we are going to talk about cortisol. Like Rashmi said, it is called as the stress hormone. Now, cortisol, what do we mean by that cortisol, stress hormone? Now, cortisol is that mischievous little hormone. It is like that overzealous friend who shows up at doorstep uninvited and barges in shouting, "We have a crisis, we have a crisis, we have a crisis." But when actually all that you've done is misplaced your car keys. So this hormone is the ultimate drama queen of your body, of your endocrine system, thriving on chaos and eager to turn, a small paper cut into a full-blown emergency. So it's like a body's personal alarm system, except it has never learned to differentiate between, the real fire or something that someone is burning a toast. So it is actually really, really helpful because it alerts you quite in time, but it doesn't know to what extent it has to alarm you. So, Rashmi, can you tell us what is cortisol and what are its functions besides this?
Yes, yes. So thank you so much for the wonderful introduction about cortisol. Cortisol has such a bad reputation, right? When we think about cortisol, I'm sure everybody knows about it. You have heard about cortisol at some point, and you feel that, oh my God, my cortisol levels are so high. I'm so stressed. And people think it is cool to have stress. So stress is like a badge they're wearing. I am very stressed. That means I must be very productive. I must be very busy. No, that's not right. So cortisol is actually a normal response to acute stress or chronic stress. So if we go back, you just step back and see what people, when humans were living in caves, had to deal with. So the stress was acute. It was not chronic stress that was forever. Whenever a human faced a threat, like a tiger that we have talked about previously, or any wild animal, or any threat, so there was something called a fight or flight response. We have talked about this in the in the first episode. So what happened there was the human had to decide, or even in other animals, they had to decide whether they dealt with the threat or they fled from there. That's why it's called a fight or flight response. Now, noradrenaline or norepinephrine is very, very important in the response itself, in how a person or an animal responds to that threat. But in order to have the energy to respond, the surge of energy that is required in such a threat is provided by cortisol. So cortisol is the steroid hormone that is secreted by our adrenal glands, and it gives this rush of energy which lets us respond to any kind of threat. So it is actually very, very helpful. It has so many other important functions that we do. But now we have chronic stress. We have high cortisol levels all the time. So if we look at different functions of cortisol, the first thing it is doing is to regulate how we respond to stress. If we talk about the other things it is doing, it also regulates our sleep wake cycle along with melatonin. If we see how cortisol is released and the levels are reduced, the levels are very high. They peak early in the morning to have this rush of energy when we wake up. And then they start gradually going down throughout the day. There's a sharp dip at night. It is the lowest point, so the levels are really low at night when people are, probably not stressed, people feel restful. That is how we are able to go to sleep. So it's a beautiful coordination between melatonin and cortisol, where we go through the sleep wake cycle, and the energy levels are also coordinated in that way. The other thing it does is it also regulates how fast or slow the food is passing through our digestive tract. Just like we talked about how serotonin is helping food pass through, it regulates the rate of how the food is going to pass through our intestine or our digestive tract. So the beauty about this is cortisol levels are high during the day, serotonin levels are high during the day, and both of them actually help food pass at a normal rate through the digestive tract. So look at the beauty. At night, serotonin levels go down, serotonin is converted to melatonin, cortisol levels also go down. So that means the digestive tract is not supposed to work the way it works during the daytime. Food passes very, very slowly. So that's not the time we should eat at all. That's how it regulates the passage of food. And there are other things that it does. It helps us absorb nutrients. It helps regulate the electrolytes, like the levels of sodium or the levels of potassium in our body. Those are some very important functions. If we think about how blood pressure is regulated, how nutrient absorption is regulated from the same food that we eat, how food is converted to glucose. Now, if we think about nutrient absorption and the process of digestion, cortisol does something amazing. It helps us in carbohydrate digestion, it helps us in protein metabolism, it also helps us in fatty acid metabolism, fat metabolism. So, in carbohydrate metabolism, what it does is it helps us break down it helps us make glucose from non-carbohydrate sources, and it controls the level of glucose that is taken up by other organs so that glucose is available for the brain. So it actually tones down how much glucose other organs are taking up so that there is enough glucose for the brain in case we need to run or do something. We need to have that energy. The brain needs to be able to think, and we need glucose for that. So cortisol is actually reserving glucose for the brain. Glucose is the main source of energy for us. So this is a very, very important function that it does. Apart from that, it also, like I said, because it regulates the levels of electrolytes, it regulates our blood pressure. So we can see those impacts on high blood pressure, low blood pressure. It also has a significant impact on our immune system. It actually controls how much our immune system responds. It is optimal. It does not let the immune system overreact. It doesn't let it underreact. So there's a fine tuned balance of our immune system that that cortisol levels are actually maintaining. So if we think about all of these, and the other thing it does, it regulates the quality of the gut microbiome. So the gut microbiome is not actually making cortisol like the other neurotransmitters, but the gut microbiome is regulated by levels of cortisol, because cortisol is controlling so many different things in our body. And the gut microbiome controls how cortisol is produced by acting on the vagus nerve and by acting on the hypothalamus pituitary axis. So there's an indirect regulation of cortisol and the gut microbiome on each other. So
So
that is a
here's where I'm coming with my next question, Rashmi. Just for viewers who have joined in new, the gut
yes.
microbiome is a bustling community of trillions of microorganisms residing in our digestive tract, and it plays a critical role in various aspects of our physical and mental health. So this complex ecosystem not only actually aids in digestion, but also influences our immune system and even our brain function, like just now Rashmi talked about it. Now, one fascinating area of study that has come is the how these gut microbes interact with our body's stress hormones or stress
Yes.
response, especially the hormone cortisol. So, this was exactly my next question. So, how exactly does the gut microbiome impact cortisol levels in our bodies? So, how do they bring about the fluctuations because of whatever we eat or how our lifestyle is that it impacts the cortisol levels in our bodies?
Yes, so if we think about even the other functions, so I'm just going to add a few more things. One very important function of cortisol is it impacts neurogenesis, that is, formation of new neurons. And there are many other ways in which it interacts with other neurotransmitters, also, like the ones we talked about: dopamine, serotonin, gamma aminobutyric acid, and all of those. And it regulates our cognition, it regulates our mood, it regulates how we are responding to stress. So when we talk about the gut microbiome, the impact on the gut microbiome is such that when you have food passing very, very slowly or very fast because of changes in cortisol levels, the food is retained in our gut for a much longer time, or it is passing through the gut at a much faster speed. The gut microbiome lives in our gut, obviously. So it is going to impact the quality of the gut microbiome. So high levels of cortisol or even low levels of cortisol are going to cause dysbiosis. And when we have a disturbed biological system or a disturbed gut microbiome, how they synthesize other neurotransmitters, which they do, we have talked about that previously, is very, very impacted. And there's a cross play of all of these neurotransmitters when we are talking about any of these functions. So this is how cortisol levels are impacting the quality of the gut microbiome. And because the gut microbiome makes a lot of metabolites, makes a lot of short chain fatty acids, we are going to
Yes.
talk about those later. They act on the vagus nerve, that acts on the hypothalamus and pituitary axis. It also acts on the adrenal system. So the ACTH, the other hormone which is made by the adrenal glands, all of these are impacted by the quality of the gut microbiome. So when people have acute stress, instead of that cortisol levels going up and down every single day, it has this diurnal pattern where, like the circadian rhythm, it goes up and down. That doesn't happen. Cortisol levels are high throughout the day.
All.
And you can only imagine what happens when food is supposed to pass at a fast rate or an optimal rate during the day and then slow down at night. That is not happening. That is constantly passing at a fast rate because of such a dysregulation of cortisol levels. So we cannot even imagine what is happening to the food. Is it being digested optimally? Are we going to absorb all the nutrients optimally? What is going to happen to the electrolyte balance? The electrolyte imbalance itself is going to cause a lot of disturbances in the contents of the gut, in the gut microbiome, because they can only live in an optimal sodium concentration, optimal potassium concentration. So all of those are totally disrupted when there are high levels of cortisol.
So this very interesting conversation here, Rashmi, because I recently read about a study done in California over 100 adults. Okay, they did not have any mental conditions, and they were divided into they were divided into two groups, like lower people with lower resiliency. That means those who had very fast response to stress, they were immediately perturbed, and those with higher resiliency, those who could have a balance of their stress hormone and could handle stress in a better way. So that means they had a control over their cortisol, and it was monitored with their microbiome analysis as well. So this is just to mention to the viewers that currently even Anna Gen Next is also doing microbiome testing and analysis. In case you are or you want to, please write to us. We will connect to you. So this kind of microbiome analysis from the stool was done, and they found out that people with higher resiliency had exhibited lower levels of inflammation in their gut barrier, and the people with lower resiliency had higher inflammation in their gut lining. So I mean, Rashmi, now that we know that this is a fight or a flight instinct that we have, and this always, like you said, the cortisol levels remaining high. So if these cortisol levels are high, or if they are not in balance, what diseases do you foresee that or could happen to people? And if they are controlled or well balanced, how they can help us, as people who are handling all these kind of continuous stressors that we have in our life?
Yes, those are some very important points. And the study that you mentioned is also quite amazing, quite detailed. So, as you rightly said, when there are cortisol levels that are constantly high, it leads to dysbiosis. And when the microbiome is disturbed, there is inflammation. So, what happens is the gut integrity is totally disrupted. The instead of the gut being leak proof, it starts leaking. So, there is leaky gut in people who have high cortisol levels, because there is a totally very poor collection of the microbes or the bacteria that are residing in the gut. So that causes intestinal permeability, so things start leaking out. Then there is inflammation in all possible organs, wherever the toxins are reaching, wherever the waste products or the pathogens from the gut are going. And this inflammation can cause pretty much any disease that we can think of. Inflammation, when it reaches the pancreas, for example, causes diabetes. When it reaches the heart, it causes heart disease. So when it reaches the brain, it causes cognitive dysfunction. So it can cause even several forms of cancer can be caused because of a poor microbiome, because of a low diversity, or because of a collection of pathogenic germs in the gut microbiome. So there are many such diseases that are caused just by the dysbiosis that is caused by cortisol levels. But if we think of what happens with the cortisol itself, because of these very important functions, there is a disruption of sleep. The circadian rhythm is disrupted. Then all of the things that are related to poor sleep happen. Metabolic syndrome, like I said, type 2 diabetes, obesity, weight gain, especially around the belly, the neck, and the face. That happens when cortisol levels are very high, because food is metabolized very differently. I said cortisol is responsible for reserving glucose levels for the brain. When cortisol levels are too high, it won't allow other organs to take up glucose that they really need. It is going to reserve even more glucose for the brain. So what is going to happen? That glucose has nowhere to go. It cannot really reach the brain and do a lot of things there. So that itself is very disruptive. So metabolic syndrome, all of the things that are associated with metabolic syndrome, all of the things that are associated with heart disease, high blood pressure, because potassium levels are much lower, sodium levels are much higher when cortisol levels are high. So that is something that happens very commonly when people are stressed. Then there are other things like the immune system regulation. When we have a controlled response in our immune system, when cortisol levels are normal, that does not happen anymore. The immune system can overreact, or it can be very poor. So people have infections very commonly. People who are stressed have poor immunity. They can have infections very commonly. If their immune system goes in overdrive, then they can have autoimmune diseases. So it leads to a total dysregulation of the immune system. There's cognitive decline because high cortisol levels are going to prevent neurogenesis. The formation of new neurons is not going to happen the way it should happen. So that leads to mood disorders, that leads to cognitive dysfunction, and how cortisol interacts with other neurotransmitters is also highly impacted. If we talk about the actual diseases, Alzheimer's disease is something that is commonly associated with high cortisol levels. There's Cushing's disease, but then again, Cushing's disease has high cortisol levels, but it can also be caused by tumors in the adrenal glands. So it has different causes. It can have endogenous causes, it can have exogenous causes. So it can either be because of too much stress or because of tumors in the adrenal glands itself. So those are some of the things that happen when cortisol levels are very high.
It's very interesting because I mean a simple fallback of a fallout of high cortisol levels is binge eating. So once you start
Yes,
binge
absolutely.
eating, yeah, you just tend to pick up all the lifestyle disorders that you can imagine of you, because how you respond to those stress with the kind of food you eat makes a lot of impact on the diseases that may happen, or you might acquire. So that is one basic reason. I mean, the least impact that we can think of, immediate impact that we can think of, high cortisol levels and how we handle stress. So I'll
The
just
other thing,
interrupt. Yeah,
yes.
yeah,
Sorry, we
yes,
can go on for how many? There are other functions also of cortisol. So, one very important
yes.
function is how bone is made. So, bone resorption is dependent on cortisol levels. So, when cortisol levels are very high, osteoporosis is very common. That is
Oh,
not
okay.
something that anybody actually correlates with cortisol levels.
Right, right, right,
And then
right.
there are skin changes also, how the quality of the skin is. There are purple stretch marks in people who have high cortisol levels on their skin. So if you
Oh,
see purple
okay.
stretch marks, that means your cortisol levels are pretty high and you need to do something to lower them. So those are two things that I don't think are very commonly known to be
Yeah, and I
associated.
don't think anybody has correlated them with high cortisol
Yes, so
levels.
that is
They
something
might
that
be.
I have seen in studies. I have not heard from anybody about this being an effect of cortisol levels. So this, and the skin bruises very easily. The skin becomes very thin. So
Oh,
those are things that people should actually watch out for. If you have osteoporosis, if you have infections all the time, if you have high blood pressure, if you have high blood glucose, if you have pre-diabetes or diabetes, really there's the one thing to check is the level of stress. It is
right.
very rare to have low cortisol levels, but if somebody has low cortisol levels, that also is not good, because it is not going to allow people to respond to stress the way they should. And it's not a good thing. Stress is supposed to protect us from all of the threats. So there is low blood pressure when cortisol levels are low. The food is not digested properly because it passes very slowly through the gut. It is again going to lead to a different kind of dysbiosis because food is not digested. It is going to lead to much lower levels of potassium and lower levels of sodium and much higher levels of potassium. So that will lead to very low blood pressure. So there are many other opposite things that happen when cortisol levels are much
Are
lower. So
lower.
it's not good either way. It can
Yeah,
lead to
yeah.
dizziness, fainting. Sometimes there can be even shock because of low blood pressure. Electrolyte imbalance can cause all of these. There's again
Right.
increased inflammation because the immune system is not functioning properly. So there's
So,
something called Addison's disease, that is an adrenal insufficiency where cortisol is not produced optimally. So it can also lead to weight loss.
oh, okay.
So people who are going through weight loss might have low cortisol levels and they might not realize it is because of low cortisol levels. How our
Yes.
muscle is built. There is muscle actually when cortisol levels are very high, because protein metabolism that I mentioned previously is regulated by cortisol. Muscle wasting also happens when cortisol levels are very high.
Hmm.
So those are
Interesting,
some
because
that we need to
these
consider.
things, When you see a muscle loss, you think it's only the proteins in your diet that is actually impacting them, but you have never connected them to cortisol levels. So it's very interesting information here, Rashmi, that you have given or shared with us.
Yes.
And just because we are talking about the various kind of food and how they impact our cortisol levels, just to remind our viewers that in case you are looking at balancing your cortisol levels, there are some food that you can actually reach out to when you're stressed, probably chocolate, but not the one which is any type of chocolate layered with sugar, which will again cause dysbiosis. But dark chocolate, yes, because dark chocolate, regular consumption of a small piece of dark chocolate can improve mood, enhance gut microbiome diversity, and lower cortisol levels. That of course, then of course you go reach out for omega-3 fatty acid foods like salmon if you're a meat eater, and that's also anti-inflammatory. It helps relax the muscles, reduce production of cortisol. Then we have our Indian method, the turmeric latte or the turmeric, that is extremely useful in reducing your cortisol levels. It has a phytochemical called curcumin, but remember to have it with a pinch of piperin that comes from black pepper, so it's made bioavailable to your body. Then bananas, you always know that when you have bananas, you feel satiated, and you feel you're in a very comfortable zone because it has a rich source of magnesium, and it is really really helpful in bringing down your blood pressure, for a healthy blood pressure level. So normally it normalizes the cortisol level as well. So bananas are good. Then you have mushrooms, which also have beta glucans, which are known to lower cortisol levels. Now we have flax seeds again, omega-3 fatty acids and phytoestrogens, which help bringing down the blood pressure and the cortisol. Onions, you will be surprised. Onions are very good cortisol level reducers. And then green tea. You always have that green tea after your food, and then you're relaxed. So these are some of the food items that you can reach out in case you're stressed out and you feel that your cortisol levels are rising. But besides this, Rashmi, what else would you suggest our viewers to do to bring down the cortisol level? I think you even shared something. You said at the beginning of the podcast that you wanted to share some
Yes,
experience.
yes.
Yes.
Yes. So I'm going to share it at the end. We have to remember that, the cortisol that has a bad reputation has it because of how we are dealing with life. So we see so many people giving so much of a priority to their careers. Food is the least priority. People say that, oh, I don't have time for this. I don't have time for this. That is how we are designed to live. So if we don't have time for our food, if we don't have time to relax, if we don't have time to enjoy a hobby, if we don't have time, then we are making the wrong choices, because we are moving towards a state that is going to be diseased. Because as we always say, food is the first medicine, oxygen is medicine, exercise is medicine, meditation is amazing to reduce stress. If we do even 5 minutes of meditation, it reduces stress so much. There are so many scientific studies that have shown cortisol levels to be reduced in people who are doing regular meditation. So even 5 to 10 minutes. We have some amazing meditation videos, by the way, on our channel. If you want to check out, they are really going to help you reduce your stress. We also have a wonderful sleep meditation to help you fall asleep even faster. So that is another way of reducing stress. The thing that I did recently was, for more than 2 weeks while I was on vacation, I was completely off digital devices. I did a complete digital detox. So that is something that is going to reset even dopamine levels, that is going to help with other neurotransmitters. But it was so helpful in reducing stress, because we always have this pressure of work that we have to finish so many things. And then we tend not to care about how we are actually stressed all the time, how our cortisol levels are very high. We don't even realize what is happening and how it is impacting our overall health. So for the past more than 2 weeks, I think I must have spent at the most 5 to 10 minutes on the phone, just answering calls that were on emergency mode. I was completely, almost completely off of social media, no laptops, no TV, no digital device. I was completely immersed in nature. I was looking at the trees, the birds, wild animals, mountains. I went for a trek. It was unbelievable. I never thought I could do a digital detox, but I did it for almost 19 days, and it has been an amazing experience. Yesterday was the first time I actually opened my laptop to do something for this podcast.
Yes, yes, Rashmi, weaning off the digital devices does make an impact. People have not realized it, but actually, these digital devices have become so addictive and part of our life that sometimes weaning away, makes you gives you those anger, rush of anger, mood changes. They haven't realized how it has changed them as people because of whatever neurotransmitters we have talked in our previous episodes as well. So, viewers, if you have not viewed or if you have not tuned into our previous episodes, do that. You will find the link of how the gut microbiome, impacts our neurotransmitters. So, those are very interesting information that Rashmi has shared, eye openers, all of them, everything, every single episode has given us, real good insight into what neurotransmitters and the lack of them can do to us on our physical and mental health. So go and watch them and enjoy these episodes. Do share,
Yes,
like,
so I just
subscribe.
wanted to share one thing, that when we talk about the fight or flight response, and when we say that, oh, people who were living in caves actually had this threat when they saw a tiger. Well, I met people who are living in areas which regularly have visits in their backyard or whatever of black panthers, of leopards, of wild animals all the time, and they are not stressed. They are living in harmony with nature. They have wild animals around them all the time. And yet, here we are, most of us living in urban areas, constantly stressed. There is no tiger in front of us. There are EMIs to pay. There's children's education to take care of. There's work pressure. There's what to cook the next day. That itself can be a big stressor. Oh, what do I make for lunch, or what do I make for the kids? That itself is, we are dealing with such thing. But good planning, and not just considering this, that we are not going to be able to change everything in our life, but how we respond to it is very much in our control. So that is something that I would highly recommend for everyone. Stay calm and carry on. So that is something that we can control our response to stress. We cannot control all of the stress that is happening in our lives. We can control some of it, but how we respond to it, how we eat our food, how we choose everything in our life is very much in our control. So at least if we do that, we will have a beautiful diversity of the gut microbiome. We will have amazing normal levels of cortisol and normal levels of all the neurotransmitters. So it's not rocket science. It's not very difficult. Just go back to the basics, and
I'll just share
things will
an
fall.
experience here. We were traveling around here, and we, like as usual, we had turned on the Google Maps, and we missed an exit to take on the highway, and then all of us panicked. However, one other passenger who was with us, he said, just chill it out. Google will reroute you. And then we realized how a small reason could, raise our cortisol levels when all that we
Yes,
had to do is think about the solution that would follow. It will reroute you. You will get to your destination, albeit a little late, but yes, you
yes,
will still be there. So you don't have to,
yes,
raise your cortisol levels for that. So it's as simple as that, how we bring our stressors into our life, in our daily life, daily situations, and how we can manage to keep them at bay by just keeping our, calm or cool at that particular moment, judging whether it needs that kind of response or not.
yes.
So
Thank you so
thank you,
much,
Rashmi.
Sujata. Thank
Very
you for
interesting
this.
podcast. Thank you.
Yes. So I think the viewers really need to hear about this. And thank you so much, Sujata. So, viewers, if you learned more about cortisol, how to control them, do start those tricks right away, because we cannot control everything that is happening in our life. We can control our response to it. We can control our food choices, how we use meditation, how we use all of the tools that nature has provided for us to reduce our stress. Let us use cortisol as a tool to help us with the normal stressors in life. Let us not let cortisol cause disease. So, if you found this useful, do subscribe to our channel. If you haven't, do share this video, do like this video. See you in the next one.